Joining us right now is Punchbowl News co-founder Jake Sherman. He is also an NBC News political contributor. And we were just talking about what Kevin McCarthy had to say to Andrew yesterday. What was your takeaway on this? What did you think? Because he made some pretty strong accusations and some strong charges about Biden and his age issue.
Yeah, I thought it was a great interview. Number one, listen, Kevin McCarthy's probably the most, and this is not an insult, the most political person I've ever met or covered. I've covered him my whole career and effectively his whole federal career. And that's who he's always been. He ascended in the House Republican Conference and in Congress because he was political. He was overtly political. Nothing wrong with that specifically, but it's interesting to hear him say that now. Something else I thought was very, very interesting were his comments on Trump, saying that he didn't say Trump would be a great president when Andrew asked, but he thought he would be better than Biden. And one thing that McCarthy had said privately over time and now is saying publicly is that if Trump runs a 2024 campaign based on grievances, based on revenge and things like that, which is what he's doing now, he will not win the presidency in 2024. All things that I would imagine that Kevin McCarthy would never, I don't have to imagine, he would never say these things if he were Speaker of the House.
Let's follow up with you on this. Let's just show everybody one other clip for a second, because I want to get your thoughts on it. President Biden's age, as you know, came up during those conversations, both with McCarthy and Vice President Kamala Harris. Here's what happened. The reason why I'm asking the question is because of his age. I just say it objectively. That's the issue. Kevin McCarthy was here this morning, and he was, in very stark terms, effectively said that he did not believe that President Biden was the same President Biden that he used to talk to.
I did not negotiate the debt ceiling with Biden. I could not negotiate the debt ceiling with Biden.
What do you mean? Explain that.
It was policy. It was certain decisions. He talked from cards.
With all due respect, when anyone who has had the experience that he has most recently had, I don't think he's a judge of negotiations. But that being said, to the point, because it is a point that has been made, first of all, I would say that age is more than a chronological fact. Not only is he absolutely authoritative in rooms around the globe, but in the Oval Office, meeting with members of Congress, meeting with leaders in industry, meeting with community leaders, I will tell you that he is in front of, often, everyone in the room in terms of thinking about how we can resolve issues.
Jake, what do you think?
Yeah, I think several things. McCarthy is right factually that he did not negotiate the debt ceiling directly with Joe Biden. That is not unusual, right? I mean, and McCarthy also didn't do some of the negotiating himself. But this is what I think, what I keep hearing from House and Senate Democrats on Capitol Hill every day, which is they're going home and they are hearing about the president's age and the inability or unwillingness, I guess is the better word, to address that from the White House is something that that could hurt Biden. So this is absolutely a concern. It's not a concern, by the way, that is new. It's a concern that we've heard for years. But I heard from people on that negotiating team when McCarthy was negotiating the debt limit that there were also good days with Biden where he was completely sharp and he was not talking from cards. So I think this is not it's not a steady thing across the board. It's not completely consistent.
Were you surprised that he said that so directly?
Yes and no. I'm surprised he said it directly publicly, McCarthy. But listen, McCarthy has said, McCarthy has taken digs at Biden before. He used to get political points for this. He said.
Why shouldn't it be public, Jake? I mean, if people have real concerns about this, why shouldn't
and just saying he has good days and bad days. I mean, that, he's president every day, Jake. And the other thing that was, and I didn't want to mention in front of, I don't want to disparage the vice president, but one of the biggest reasons that people are worried about Biden's age is because Kamala Harris is a heartbeat away from the presidency. That's one of the reasons people are so frightened about President Biden's age. You didn't say that, did you, Andrew? I guess you couldn't really say that to her, that One of the biggest reasons
well, no,
people are
I said
worried
the
about
reason why everyone's eyes are on you. Oh, no, it was said.
Yeah.
We can play that part of the tape, too. No, I said to her.
And I think people are more worried about her than even him in the state he's in right now. Right?
Look, you can look at the polls, you can look at the approval ratings for her relative to Biden, relative to Trump, and we went through all of that. Her view is that the polls are not reflective of what she says she's seeing in America as she's going out there. I can't speak to that. I'm not doing the polls. I don't know where we are in polling season, if you will. But that was the answer she gave.
Jake,
some people found it satisfying. I'm sure others may have not found it satisfying.
Jake, just back to that point. If people have real questions, why shouldn't they be said out loud? I mean, that's the thing that makes American voters so unhappy. The idea that there's this inner circle of people in power who know things that the rest of us don't. If there are real concerns, I'd like to hear it. And I'd like to hear from other people if they think that that's either real or not real.
Well, I didn't say they shouldn't be said publicly. I just said that McCarthy, when he was Speaker of the House, had to maintain a relationship with the White House that could be used to legislate. It was used on national security. He is somebody that had to deal with the White House all the time, so he would probably be a little bit less likely to take a shiv to the president. That's just a fact. But listen, I think in all facets of life and business and politics, people have conversations privately that they don't have publicly. And I think that members of the president's party have been concerned about his age for a long time. I don't think that's a secret. I think that's reflected in the public dialogue.
No, but being concerned about age is one thing. Being concerned about someone's competency is another. Do you hear that off the record from a lot of people, either Democrats or Republicans, who have access to him?
Well, most Republicans don't have access to him, and that's just the reality of it. From some Democrats, but not the vast majority of them. No, but from some Democrats, but mostly from Republicans who are relayed stories from the few Republicans who do have access to him.